Cards for Army Provision. Part 1. The New Currency. The war came to Maple Street not with a bang, but with a whisper of paper. For Leonard and Margaret Briggs of Oak Ridge, Illinois, it arrived in the form of Book 1 of War Ration Book 1, issued by the Office of Price Administration. It was a small, bound folio of green and brown stamps, each one a tiny perforated square of power and limitation. Leonard, a history teacher whose bad eyesight kept him stateside, studied it at the kitchen table under the warm glow of the pendant lamp, his fingers tracing the ominous text, "Do not buy and do not sell." Margaret stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder, a silent knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Before the stamps, the war had been a distant thunder headlines in the Tribune. Edward R. Murrow's grave voice on the radio, the gold stars that began to appear in a few windows down the block. But the ration book made it intimate. It was a math problem that governed their daily life. Sugar was the first to go. Stamp 30, good for 5 pounds. Margaret, a baker whose lemon meringue pie was the stuff of local legend, stared at the empty canister as if it were a betrayal. Her pantry, once a testament to careful Depression-era abundance, now seemed like a hollow cave. How could she maintain a semblance of normalcy, of sweetness, for their 2 young boys on 5 pounds of sugar for 2 months? She thought of the soldiers, the endless cups of coffee they'd need sweetening in muddy trenches, and felt a pang of guilt for her own dismay. Then came the tires. Their 1938 Oldsmobile, their pride and their connection to Margaret's ailing mother in Peoria, now sat in the garage like a patient in need of a transplant. Leonard had to appear before a local rationing board, a tribunal of stern-faced neighbors, to plead his case for new ones. He was granted a single retread, as he was a necessary user due to his carpool for teachers. The experience was humbling. His needs were weighed, judged, found wanting against the colossal need of the military for rubber. He drove home with a profound new understanding. In this war, every resource was a soldier. A tire on his Oldsmobile was a tire not on a Jeep in North Africa. A pound of sugar in his kitchen was a pound not in a K-ration on Guadalcanal. This calculus of sacrifice became the new national religion. It was preached from posters showing a grim-faced Hitler eyeing a scrap of waste. Don't waste scrap. He wants it. It was practiced in backyards and basements. The Briggs boys, Tommy and Jimmy, became avid hunters of scrap metal. The old wringer washer that finally died, a broken lawnmower blade, a collection of tin cans meticulously washed, flattened, and bundled, all were loaded into the Oldsmobile on its one good tire and driven to the collection depot at the high school gym. The mountain of metal there, a jagged, discordant sculpture of America's past, was awe-inspiring. Bed frames, bicycle chains, broken toys, lengths of pipe. Each piece, they were told, would be melted down to become a shell casing, a tank part, a fighter plane's skin. But the most visceral ritual was the saving of kitchen fat. A poster in the butcher's window showed a housewife pouring grease into a tin can, with the caption, "A slap at the Japs. Save your waste fats for explosives." Margaret kept a specially designated coffee can by the stove. Bacon drippings, the rendered fat from a Sunday roast, the oily residue from frying nothing went to waste. Once a week, she would solidify the fat, scrape it into a paper bag, and the boys would take it to the butcher, who paid a few cents a pound and gave them red tokens. It was a strange, almost alchemical process. Her cooking, the very essence of domestic care, was being transmuted into glycerin for nitroglycerin for bombs. She felt both a sense of grotesque connection to the violence abroad and a fierce, practical pride. Her roast beef was helping to fuel the war. The home itself was enlisted. Victory gardens sprouted where lawns once grew. Leonard, no natural farmer, turned over a sizable patch of their backyard. They planted tomatoes, carrots, beans, and kale. The work was hard, the yields unpredictable, but it was a direct, tangible act of defiance against the strain on the national food supply. Neighbors exchanged tips on canning and composting. The competition was friendly but earnest. A prize tomato was a moral victory. Blackout drills transformed their cozy evenings into exercises in communal discipline. As the air raid warden's whistle blew, Leonard would draw the heavy blackout curtains, and they would sit in the dim glow of a single shaded lamp, listening to the radio, feeling the weight of a shared vulnerability. The war was not just over there. It was a potential specter in their very skies, and their compliance was a thread in the nation's defense. This web of restrictions forged a new kind of patriotism. It wasn't the flag-waving parade ground kind. It was a gritty, daily, and deeply personal devotion. It was Margaret inventing victory cake, sweetened with mashed carrots and a precious teaspoon of molasses. It was Leonard painstakingly repairing the soles of the boys' shoes with a kit, because new leather was scarce. It was saying no to a second cup of coffee, no to a drive in the country for pleasure, no to a new dress. Every no was a silent yes to a soldier, a sailor, a Marine. The home front had become a theater of war where the weapons were thrift, ingenuity, and endurance. The Briggs family, like millions of others, were learning that patriotism was not just a sentiment you felt, but a difficult, deliberate thing you did, every single day. Part 2. The fabric of austerity. As the war deepened, so did the reach of rationing. By 1943, it wasn't just sugar and tires. It was the very fabric of life. Stamp 17 in war ration. Book 2 was for shoes. 2 pairs per person per year. Margaret examined Tommy's scuffed, outgrown Oxfords with a critical eye. "You'll get new ones for school in September," she said, her voice brooking no argument. "These will have to last the summer." She took them to the cobbler, a man whose business was suddenly booming, and watched as he stretched the leather, added a rubber toe cap. It was a stopgap. Everything felt like a stopgap. Meat, butter, and cheese became the holy grails of the kitchen, doled out by red and blue stamps. Margaret's meal planning transformed into a strategic campaign. A single pound of hamburger, stretched with breadcrumbs and rolled into a meatloaf, had to feed 4. Liver, once scorned, became a prized source of iron. She discovered the versatility of Spam, that iconic cylindrical soldier of the pantry, frying it, slicing it, crumbling it into casseroles. Porcupine meatballs made with rice became a family staple. The Sunday roast, a pre-war sacrament, shrank in size and frequency, its savory aroma now a rare and precious event. But it was the clothing ration that struck a different, more personal chord. Regulation L85, issued by the War Production Board, dictated fashion. It banned pleats, ruffles, patch pockets, and full skirts. Jackets were to be short, hems were to rise, not just for style, but to save fabric. And the 2-piece swimsuit, the precursor to the bikini, emerged not from libertine beaches, but from government-mandated yardage reduction. For Margaret, a woman who took quiet pride in her neat appearance, this was a subtle assault. Shopping for a new dress was no longer a pleasure, but a navigation of rules. The styles were simple, almost severe. She bought a patriotic chic suit with narrow shoulders and a straight skirt, feeling both fashionable and frugal. She learned to make do and mend, a mantra plastered on every women's magazine. Socks were darned with intricate care, collars were turned. A worn-out man's suit could be cut down into a boy's jacket. The act of sewing became a political statement, a declaration that she would not be a drain on the resources needed for parachutes and uniforms. The psychological weight of this constant calculus was immense. A simple trip to the grocer's became an exercise in high-stakes logistics. Margaret would stand in line, her ration book and her wallet in hand, mentally adding and subtracting stamps. Could she afford this can of coffee with stamp 28, or should she save it? Was there enough of stamp 16 left for a pound of the cheaper stew meat? The butcher, the baker, the grocer, all had become gatekeepers, arbiters of this new austerity. Rumors of black markets, a side of beef for a price, Nylon stockings under the counter circulated in hushed, angry tones. To participate was not just illegal, it was treasonous, a betrayal of the boys at the front who had no such options. The social pressure to comply was immense. The woman who complained too loudly about her shoe allowance or was seen wearing an obviously new non-regulation dress risked cold stares and muttered accusations of being a wartime profiteer in spirit. Leonard felt the strain differently. His contribution was the scrap drive, magnified. As faculty advisor for the high school's Victory Corps, he turned collection into a crusade. They organized paper drives that stripped attics bare of old newspapers, magazines, and books. He gave impassioned speeches in assembly about how pulp became packing for mortar shells. They collected tin foil, rolling the bits from gum wrappers and cigarette packs into a giant shining ball that eventually weighed over 50 pounds. The most haunting drive was for silk and nylon stockings. Women, including Margaret, donated their precious, irreplaceable pre-war stockings, some with tears hastily mended. These were not for soldiers' comfort. They were for the powder bags in naval guns, where synthetic fibers provided a consistent, static-free burn. Holding a bundle of these intimate garments, each with the ghostly shape of a woman's leg, Leonard felt a profound, sobering connection. The vanity of Main Street was being converted into the fury of the broadside. The home was stripped for the cause. The ornate iron fence that had surrounded the Briggs property since the Victorian era was the hardest sacrifice. It had been Margaret's grandmother's, but the call for iron was urgent. With a mixture of pride and grief, Leonard and the boys helped workmen wrench it from its stone posts. As it was loaded onto a truck, the gap it left felt like a missing tooth in the face of their home. But Leonard looked at the empty space and saw not loss, but potential. That fence, he told his sons, might come back as part of a Sherman tank, rolling through some French hedgerow, protecting their cousin who was somewhere in that very fight. The abstraction of the war effort had been made concrete, heavy, and cold to the touch. Their past was literally being melted down to forge the future. Part 3. The Sweetness of Sacrifice. The winter of 1944-45 was the leanest. The Normandy invasion had succeeded, but the battles in the Hurtgen Forest and the surprise of the Bulge were consuming men and materiel at a horrific rate. The home front felt the pull tighter than ever. Coffee was virtually unobtainable. Margaret's coffee was a bleak concoction of roasted chicory and grains. The boys complained that their pancakes tasted of sawdust because she used corn syrup and grain flours to stretch the precious stores of white flour and sugar. Silk and nylon were distant memories. Women drew mock seams up the back of their legs with eyeliner to simulate stockings. It was in this atmosphere of deepest deprivation that the true, complex character of wartime patriotism revealed itself. It wasn't just about enduring lack. It was about creatively, joyfully transcending it. The Briggs Victory Garden, now in its third year, was no longer a struggling patch, but a prolific provider. Margaret became an expert in canning tomatoes and making pickles. The surplus was not hoarded. It was traded. A jar of her pickles might go to the neighbor, Mrs. Gunderson, in exchange for a few eggs from her clandestine backyard chickens. Leonard's careful repair of a toaster earned them a precious quarter-pound of real butter from a grateful mechanic. A barter economy, born of mutual need and trust, flourished alongside the official rationed one. Community, strained by worry, was strengthened by this daily interdependence. Christmas 1944 was the ultimate test of this spirit. Pre-war Christmases had featured a mountain of presents, a towering tree, and a feast. This year the tree was smaller, scavenged from a less-than-perfect lot. Presents were almost entirely homemade or practical. Knitted socks, a wooden model airplane Leonard carved, a notebook covered in attractive wallpaper scraps. The feast was an epic of substitution. The turkey was a tough, scrawny bird, but Margaret stuffed it with a savory bread dressing rich with herbs from the garden. The butter on the table was a margarine that came as a white lump with a capsule of yellow dye. The boys fought over who got to knead the color in, finding it a hilarious novelty. The pumpkin pie was sweetened with the last of the molasses and a careful tablespoon of hoarded sugar. But as they sat down to eat, Leonard asked for a moment of quiet. He spoke not of the missing treats, but of the abundance they did have. He spoke of the letters from their cousin in Belgium, who described the liberation, the chocolate bars from GIs, the real gratitude for freedom. He spoke of the warmth in their home, the food on their table, the safety of their street, all made possible by the collective sacrifice of millions just like them. "We are not just giving up things," he said, his teacher's voice soft but firm. "We are investing them. Every empty place at this table where a steak might have been, every patch on a knee, every quiet Christmas, it's all a down payment on the peace." In that moment, the austerity shed its grim skin and revealed its core, a profound, active love of country. Patriotism was the flavor of Margaret's victory cake, not as sweet, but more sustaining. It was the pattern of darning on a sock, a visible sign of care and continuity. It was the empty space where the fence had been, a testament to faith in a future worth defending. When VJ Day finally came in August 1945, the celebrations on Maple Street were wild, tearful, and profound. But for the Briggs, the transition was not an instant return to plenty. Rationing on some items, like sugar, persisted into 1946. Habits forged in necessity were hard to break. Margaret caught herself saving bacon grease out of reflex. Leonard looked at a new car advertisement with a skeptic's eye, thinking of the tires, the gasoline. The war had changed them. It had taught them that the strength of a nation lies not in its unlimited resources, but in the disciplined hearts of its people. They had learned that patriotism in a total war was a holistic endeavor. It was in the kitchen, in the garden, in the closet, in the choice to walk instead of drive. The shared sacrifice had woven a new social fabric, one that was less about individual consumption and more about communal survival and purpose. Years later, Margaret would find War Ration Book 4, unused, in a drawer. She would hold the fragile, outdated stamps, and a wave of memory would wash over her, not of deprivation, but of potency. She remembered the weight of the scrap metal, the glow of the Victory Garden, the quiet determination in her husband's eyes as he explained the ration points. They had not just endured history. They had, in a million small, paper-clad ways, helped to make it. The sweetness of that victory, they knew, was made all the richer by the bitterness they had willingly swallowed. Their patriotism had been measured not in words, but in stamps, in scraps, in saved fat, and in the quiet, unwavering conviction that every small denial on the home front was an affirmation of life for the boy on the front line.